Well, you found us, Trinity Place in Geneva, New York. Welcome. Glad you could join us for this online worship, and hope that perhaps someday we'll see you in person when we can all be together again. Welcome. This is an agape meal worship, meaning we invite the community to share in a ritual meal together virtually. Pause the video here if you wish and gather some bread and wine, cheese, a beer, tea, and cookies for that matter, or anything you wish to use as a symbol of our community, gathered around an open table in memory of Jesus, who taught us that radical hospitality of God's dream for humankind is also ours. Yes, neither death nor life, nor angels, nor anxieties and fears, nothing now, nothing in the future, no powers, nothing above us, nothing below us, nor anything else in the whole world will ever be able to separate us from the love of God. Please pray with me. We are stewards of the earth, and we have betrayed that trust. We are our sisters' and brothers' keepers, and we have violated their trust. We are colleagues in the ministry to respect the dignity of every human being, and we have not lived up to that trust. We are in covenant with you, beloved, and we betrayed that relationship too. We'll take a moment now to imagine how we might get better at fidelity to our primary commitments to care for the earth and one another as agents of God's love. In a moment, as we conclude this period of quiet, I invite your response in bold italic. O God, with our lives we proclaim your praise and your love all the day long. Be not far from us. Your presence is a help in all times.
Oh, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, And you that have no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me and eat what is good, and delight yourselves in rich food. Incline your ear and come to me. Listen, so that you may live. I will make with you an everlasting covenant, my steadfast, sure love for David. See, I made him a witness to the peoples, a leader and commander for the peoples. See, you shall call nations that you do not know, and nations that do not know you shall run to you, because of the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, for he has glorified you.
Each night, in a space he'd make between waking and purpose, my grandfather donned his one suit in our still dark house and drove through Brooklyn's deserted streets, following trolley tracks to the bakery. There he changed into white linen work clothes and cap, and in the absence of women, his hands were both loving, well into dawn and throughout the day, kneading, rolling out, shaping, each astonishing moment of yeasty predictability in that windowless world lit by the slightly swaying naked bulbs, where the shadows staggered, woozy with the aromatic warmth of the work. Then the suit and drive again, at our table graced by a loaf that steamed when we sliced it, softened the butter and leavened the very air we'd breathe. He'd count us blessed.
When Jesus heard what had happened to John, he left in a boat and went to a lonely place by himself. But the crowds heard about it and followed him on foot from the towns. When he arrived, he saw a great crowd waiting. He felt sorry for them and healed those who were sick. When it was evening, his followers came to him and said, "No one lives in this place, and it's already late. Send the people away so they can go to the towns and buy food for themselves." But Jesus answered, "They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish." Jesus said, "Bring the bread and the fish to me." Then he told the people to sit down on the grass. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking to heaven, he thanked God for the food. Jesus divided the bread and gave it to his followers, who gave it to the people. All the people ate and were satisfied. And then the followers filled 12 baskets with the leftover pieces of food. There were about 5,000 men there who ate, not counting women and children.
Out of darkness came light,
And the power of God was revealed in the running wave and the flowing air.
in the quiet earth and in the shining stars. Out of the dust came life,
And the image of God was revealed in the human face and the gentle heart, in the warmth of flesh and the depth of soul.
out of justice came freedom,
And the wisdom of God was revealed in the need to grow and the will to love, in the chance to know and the power to choose.
and God looked at the creation.
And behold, it was very good.
We're all invited to the common table to share in an agape feast. At this table, we come as brothers and sisters in the holy family of God. Taste and see that God is good. As we share this bread, as we pour out this drink, we thank you, beloved, for our daily bread, for the food which delights and nourishes us, and for the companionship that sustains us as spiritual community. We thank you. We thank you, too, for this drink to quench our thirst, and for the living water with which you surprise and enrich and transform our lives. We give thanks for this feast at which all of us can share, and in that splendid hospitality, a foretaste of your realm. Amen. Welcome. My name is Cameron Miller, and I'm coming to you from Trinity Place in Geneva, New York. And this sermon is based on the lessons, the readings for
proper 13, year A in the Common Lectionary, Revised Common Lectionary, or 9 Pentecost if you want to look those up. But it's basically using Matthew's Gospel of the feeding of 5,000, which leads me to ask, what is it about bread? Most of you who hear or read this sermon have access to varieties and quantities of food that those peasants in Matthew's story never dreamed of tasting. Even now, when the pandemic and inept federal response to help states find and manage resources, and when there are indeed food shortages because of poor distribution and the absence of moral will, our general level of caloric intake is pounds and pounds and pounds greater than the peasants at Jesus' side. So here's a fascinating, at least one that I found fascinating, reading. It's an image that we're given about Galilee in Jesus' days from an article entitled Poverty in the First Century Galilee. It goes like this. The poverty in Galilee is also reflected by the fact that almost no remains of storage buildings or grain or other products have been found in archaeological excavations in Galilee, and no shops at all. The Galileans seem to have consumed all they produced, having paid the rents and taxes and loan remissions and interest. There simply was nothing left to trade with. It brings to mind the image of people in a life raft consuming anything that they find to eat or drink as soon as they find it and can get it. But most of us, you and I, have food in the pantry or the refrigerator, the freezer. We know how and where to get more food if we need it. Bread to those folks in Jesus' day was the primary source of calories, ravenously eaten as soon as it was gotten. We fret about carbs. But does anything smell better than bread baking in the oven? And the act of kneading bread, it's both sensual and practical and laborious. And the mystery of yeast, though not a mystery really, is still fascinating. And what about butter melting into the porous surface of toast? Oh, bread. The mouths of the lavishly rich and the painfully poor all welcome bread, which, though seldom observed, is what the story in Matthew is about. Now, whether by intention and design or not, the folks that put the lectionary together left out half of Matthew's story. My suspicion is it's because they wanted us to focus on Matthew's story as a miracle story. But for Matthew, anyway, as he told it and as he edited his gospel, this is not a miracle story. This bread story is political commentary and economic and social criticism. Now, wait a minute. In case your reaction to that news is suspicion and resistance because you don't like the sounds of it ideologically or you prefer your Jesus without politics, cut me a little slack here. Give me just a few minutes to explain why this looks like social commentary more than a miracle story. I understand why there might be some resistance because whenever the story has been told, only half of it's been included. So today's reading, as you'll see from the lectionary, begins this way. It says, "Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew in a boat to a deserted place all by himself." Now, if we didn't get so fascinated with the feeding of the 5,000, we might otherwise ask ourselves, heard what? Now, when Jesus heard this, he withdrew in a boat to a deserted place. Heard what? This story properly begins far from a boat, far away from hungry peasants, far away on the other side of the lake. Matthew's version, anyway, of this feeding story begins where Herod lives, King Herod the Great. It begins with King Herod's birthday party. As we might guess, it's an opulent feast and the pluperfect opposite of Jesus' feast. At Herod's feast, there is the heavy aroma of lamb sizzling on the spit. There's seasoned duck and pheasants, maybe. Even soft, steaming bread with wonderful flavors to dip it into. There's juicy, succulent fruits and wine, lots and lots and lots of wine. At Herod's feast, they eat while reclining on pillows. At Herod's feast, there's music. At Herod's feast, there's dancing. In fact, at Herod's feast, there's a special dance performance, a sensual dance with youthful bodies schooled in the art of seduction. Herod, the subplot tells us, is smitten with one of the dancers. Smitten might be too wholesome of a word. He is engorged with lust for the dancer that is his teenage stepdaughter. Herod becomes senseless with craving as she dances. His hunger rides on the horse of his affluence, galloping out of control. She dances and he falls prey to his obsession. Keep dancing, he begs as the music stops. Keep dancing and I'll give you anything you want. Anything, gold, power, palaces, slaves. What makes you happy? None of that, she says. Cut off the head of John the Baptist and serve it to me on a platter. I know, right? How did John the Baptist get into this crazy story? Well, John the Baptist was another prophet and social critic, more renowned in Jesus' day than Jesus was. He was already in prison because he had been a severe critic of Herod and because he had crossed the line with his moral finger-wagging. So, long story short, an entourage of kitchen slaves arrives carrying a large, handsome silver platter. Ceremoniously, they make their way through the feasting crowd and place the human head, its eyes wide open, its lips curled in a gruesome, crooked grimace. Truth written all over that face. And they set it at the table before the king. Jesus hears that story about John's beheading, and immediately he leaves for a deserted place, which I take to mean that he got the heck out of wherever he was and went into hiding. Now, when Jesus heard this, Matthew tells the story of the first feast, and then immediately he tells about the second feast. Was Jesus freaked out and afraid? Was he grievous for the loss of a friend? Does he immediately recognize that the punchline of Herod's action is that those with power do not give it away, or those who own affluence will not soon part with it? Now, in my imagination, it's both. Jesus was in grief, and he made a strategic retreat to consider his options. But Jesus is followed. Jesus is followed by a crowd. Without a helicopter, without a horse, without even a bicycle, Jesus can't get away from the crowd. It's kind of funny. We never thought about Jesus running, have we? The people who follow Jesus are hungry. They're hungry. Now remember, they consume everything they have, all the time, because they don't have any extra. People like that don't have hope very often either. They can't afford hope. But for whatever reasons, and let's be honest, we're not sure all the reasons, Jesus inspires hope. Jesus is followed by people who are hungry for food and who are hungry for hope. Thus comes the story of the second feast. At Jesus' feast, there's no music. At Jesus' feast, there's no protein. There's no fish in Matthew's story. That comes much later in John's story. At Jesus' feast, there's no wine. At Jesus' feast, there's no pillows. At Jesus' feast, there's no dancing. At Jesus' feast, there's only bread. Bread. At Jesus' feast, the host shares what he has and acts as though it will be enough, even though he doesn't know whether or not it actually will be enough. At Jesus' feast, there is no affluence, as there was at Herod's feast, but there is at Jesus' feast abundance. And right there is the fulcrum upon which this tale of two feasts balances. Affluence is what we have when we own wealth and resources. When we own wealth and resources. Abundance is what we have when we have more than enough. You get that? We can have more than enough and not be affluent. And we can be affluent and not have abundance. That's the social commentary of this gospel, by the way. The one I said was not about a miracle. An economy based on abundance ensures that everybody has enough. Whether no one is wealthy or some are wealthy, everyone still has enough. Abundance is the invisible hand that guides the economy of God. And that is the tale of what the tale of two feasts is about. The primary narrative of Herod's economy, and in fact ours, I'm afraid, is that we should own more than we need and accumulate as much as we can, even if such affluence offers no abundance. Our economy is guided by an invisible hand of natural selection, and it grabs as much as it can. And so in our economy, it's built on the principle of scarcity, so that affluence is shared by only a few and abundance, more than enough, is impossible, because in affluence there is never enough, no matter how much we have. The social commentary of this gospel is that affluence deepens our hunger, affluence deepens our desires, affluence deepens and seduces us with promises of more and more and more and more. Abundance, on the other hand, abundance ensures that we have enough, even more than enough. No matter how much or how little we have relative to everybody else, it's enough. An economy of abundance may include people with wealth, but it does not allow anyone to suffer significant deprivation. So the moral of these two feasts, which are one story really, is that affluence leads to jealousy and anxiety and violence, while abundance leads to generosity and empowerment and community. But let's not promote or live in fantasy. We don't get to decide which economy we live in. They're both side by side, as if straddling two dimensions at one and the same time. We live in our economy even as we might desire to live in the economy of God. Which means that our spiritual task, our baptismal ministry, really, is to release ourselves as much as possible from the seductive power of affluence and nurture in ourselves and nurture in one another the hope and the work of abundance. You see, as I read it, the tale of two feasts in Matthew is not a miracle story. Rather, it's about us and about which economy we will thrive in. That seems like a life-saving reminder in the midst of pandemic and in the midst of political and social crisis. You and I individually, we cannot change the facts on the ground, but we can choose to live by and follow abundance rather than scarcity. It may feel risky for us to do so because everybody around us is shouting, "Scarcity!" But I invite us instead to intentionally, and with all the spiritual strength and imaginative muscle that we have, to shape the lens of our abundance and look through and live by that. Peace be with you. And really, thank you for listening.